Hello, New Mexico, and welcome to Around the Roundhouse. I'm Margaret O'Hara. Your regular host, Daniel Chacon, is off this week, so I'll be filling in. Our guest today is Representative Christine Chandler, who represents Los Alamos County, plus parts of Santa Fe and Sandoval counties in the New Mexico House. Representative Chandler, welcome to Around the Roundhouse, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Maddie, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So, to start off, could you tell us a little bit about you and some of the significant pieces of legislation that you brought forward this year?
For sure. So as you pointed out, I am the representative for Los Alamos, Santa Fe, and Sandoval counties. I've held that position now for about 7 years. I'm going into my 7th year, so it'll be my 4th term. Since I've been elected, I've held a number of positions in the legislature. I was the chair of the tax committee for a while, and now I'm the chair of House Judiciary. And I've held that position, I think, for about 3 terms, 3 years now. I enjoy it very much. It's a challenging job, and as a result, though, I learn a lot about a lot of things. So this year, as I'm sure you know, it was a very significant piece of legislation. I co-sponsored with my colleague, Representative Serrato and Senator Mimi Stewart, the Paid Family and Medical Leave Act bill. And that was an important piece of legislation for the state, and we worked very hard to get it through the House. This year, we approached it a little differently. Yeah, as you know, and there have been concerns in the House in terms of the scope of the bill and other issues. So this year we worked with members in the chamber to devise a bill that I would say is really uniquely New Mexican. Paid family medical leave is a national trend, and as a result, we tend to follow what the trend has been doing. And the trend has been to offer 12 weeks for the medical component and some other things, and 12 weeks for welcoming a child into the family. So that's having a child or adopting a child. This year, we approached it a little differently. There have been concerns expressed that the bill was too expansive to start with. The small businesses were concerned about the amount of paid leave that people would be receiving, as well as the cost of the program. Because remember, we pay for the program largely through, premiums on wages, and the employer would pay a part of it, the employee would pay a part of it. So what we did was we split it between the state and employers and employees. So there are 3 parties now to the program, which is unusual. And I think it's appropriate because we have a healthy revenue stream through the early childhood programming that we've been doing. As you know, we have an early childhood trust fund. We have the land grant permanent fund that funds various things. So what we did was we culled out the piece that relates to pregnancy and adoption, and the state was going to pick that amount up. And each person who has a child would get $3,000 a month for 3 months. So that was a $9,000 stipend. There would be job protection, because that's an important component. An employer can't fire someone because the person is out on maternity leave, or in this case, leave to welcome an adopted child. So that piece, the state would pretty much be taken care of through funding, direct funding. That allowed us to lower the premiums for employers and employees on the other part of the program. So we dropped the premium for employers and employees to 0.2% for employees and 0.15%, a very small amount of money when you think about it. And what that pencils out to, if you have a minimum wage workforce, is 75 cents a week for employers and $1 a week for employees. Very affordable. And to respond to concerns about the length of time that would be offered, it would be for 6 weeks, which, by the way, is not an uncommon length of time in the private sector if you're buying disability insurance. So when I worked at the laboratory, I had a short-term disability plan, and it was 6 weeks. So I'd like to think that we were listening and we were consulting with many, many stakeholders to get this to a place where the House could support the bill. And we did that. And there was strong support in the House, brought it to the Senate, got it through one committee, and then it stalled in Senate Finance. The reasons for its stalling are frankly not entirely clear to me. They were not well articulated. A number of the members on that committee had voted for the program last year, a bigger, more expensive program last year. So I'm not entirely clear. Maybe it was just adjusting to the idea, a different concept going forward where the state had a more significant financial role. As I said, I'm not entirely sure, but we plan on working on this again over the interim, and we plan on working on it in the next session. I think it will be a path forward. I think members see that we're willing to work with them in terms of coming up with a solution that's a compromise that satisfies as many people as possible. We're not going to satisfy everyone, but certainly there is a compromise position that I think we will be able to get to moving forward.
So tell me a little bit about what is next for paid family leave. Where do you see this going, especially during the interim?
Well, I think we need to understand better what the concerns were on the Senate side and see if we can attempt to address them while keeping the general framework. Because remember, it's a tricky balance. We have members in the House who were very satisfied with this program that we presented to them. And so we need to find a middle ground that's going to be satisfactory to enough people that we can get it through both the Senate and the House. I mean, it's a challenge, but once I think we're all going to be delighted with the program once it is enacted and in place. But it will be a struggle for a little while. We need to understand better what the issues were on the Senate side.
And I want to talk a little bit about another major piece of legislation that you worked on, and that was House Bill 8, which was a big public safety bill that included some criminal competency reforms that you had proposed. So tell me a little bit about that bill and those reforms.
Okay, so this bill stems from the discussion of the concerns in the special session that was called by the governor. Now, you'll remember in the spring of last year, the governor called a special session raising concerns about how our criminal competency law works. And I think it might be helpful to explain criminal competency because it's a little bit of an esoteric topic for just folks on the street. Competency is a person must be competent to stand trial, meaning they must have the ability to participate in their own defense. Otherwise, they're deprived of due process. So when competency is raised, there needs to be a process in place that either brings the person to competency or somehow addresses that person's underlying mental health condition. At least that's my perspective. It's a complicated topic, and the special session was not an appropriate place to be considering it because we really needed to look at it carefully. So we did that over the interim, and we talked to many stakeholders and experts in the field, and were able to come up with a bill that addressed, I think, most people's concerns. So what are those concerns? One is individuals who are charged with low-level crimes and competency is raised and that person is found to be not competent, there was no way to address the underlying issues with that person under current law. Under current law, that person's case would be dismissed, which is frustrating for, I think, everyone, maybe for different reasons. So what we did was we said, okay, how can we address that issue, which, is a legitimate issue to be concerned about. So we created a process where prosecutors can either seek to have that person brought to competency through an outpatient process, because currently the only process in place is an inpatient program, or have that person participate in what we call assisted outpatient treatment. And if that happens, the case will be dismissed, but the person will be compelled to get treatment. And that approach seemed to address a number of the concerns that were outstanding. We also increased the potential use of commitment to bring people to competency by increasing the number of crimes that a person might be charged with that would qualify them for inpatient competency restoration. So I know that might be confusing, and I'm happy to answer any questions that might illuminate it more, but we created more pathways. I think this is the way to think about it. More pathways to address someone who has a mental illness, a serious mental illness that is causing them to interact with the criminal justice system. And we'll see how it plays out. This is a new approach, and, over time we may have to reevaluate some of the provisions, but on the whole, I think this will get us to a better place than where we're at now. And the governor's staff and the governor was happy with this, the Senate was, and, I'm hopeful after a lot of work, and I said consultation with all sorts of stakeholders, this will be a useful tool as we try to help people, which is really what I'm most interested in. People who have a mental illness, which is causing them to not behave in ways that are appropriate and in many cases illegally.
Definitely. And while we talked about this during the session, you were sort of one of the first to admit that changes to the state's criminal competency system will require real investment in the behavioral health care infrastructure, workforce, and that entire sector. And we saw some of that this session.
Yes.
So tell me about what connection you see between these competency reforms and those investments.
So, one thing I want to point out is the Senate and the House work very well together on this issue, which is, I think that it should be a model for how we approach things. So in discussions with the chair of Senate Judiciary and our speaker and our leaders in the Senate, we agreed that just addressing the criminal aspect is only one part of it, that we needed to amplify our approaches to addressing behavioral health and actually invest in behavioral health in a significant way, because we need to get to the place where mental illness is not the underlying cause of a lot of what's happening, or drug, substance abuse, which is also a problem in this mix. So what we did was we've created a behavioral health trust fund and identified $1 billion investment in that. And we've also this year, I think the number is something on the order of 120 million or 130 million direct investment from our budget this year in expanding access to behavioral health through, developing a workforce, identifying places where we can place facilities and when I say place, I think there's going to be an emphasis on reusing buildings and the like, not necessarily brand new built buildings, but looking for regional placement of behavioral health facilities so that, they're across the state and that we have a better way to get treatment for people who need it. And, I think we can all agree we are woefully short on behavioral health treatment for just about every sector of our community.
And I'm wondering, we're sort of in the zone now of waiting to see how these criminal competency reforms will play out, as you mentioned. I'm wondering, will these two things, will this investment in behavioral health and these criminal competency changes come together at the right time? Are these going to work together to improve things, in your opinion?
Yes, I mean, it's going to be tricky, but the courts have already begun to expand access to assisted outpatient treatment, and I want to give kudos to them as well, because we also consulted closely with the judiciary and the Supreme Court in terms of how we could expand assisted outpatient treatment and what their role would be in that that provision of services, because now they are a very important component in that programming. And what we did was, if you remember, we created some pilot assisted outpatient treatment programs during the special session a year ago, and those are getting close to being online. We got a briefing from the Supreme Court Justice during this session where he said Santa Fe's would be up and running soon. So there will be some establishing of some of the infrastructure for some of these programs now, soon. I will also point out that we're expanding at UNM. The forensic psychologists are on board, and that program there is very much interested in providing strong support to us as we go forth and implement. And I would expect that if they need additional resources, we'll be hearing from them. So it is going to be, there will not be a perfect alignment, but we have already begun to establish some of the behavioral health pieces that are identified in the law.
And the other thing, you mentioned that some of these efforts stemmed from the special session last year. I know Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham has been teasing another special session to continue the legislature's work on public safety. And I'm just wondering, are you in favor of that? Do you think that's a good place to get this kind of work done?
I think it's premature to be talking about a special session. And I think what we learned from the last special session was, unless there is a well-established, goal, and that there's general agreement before going in as to what the approach we should be taking, the special session will be for naught. And I've been told by veteran lawmakers who've been through many special sessions, I have not, that they are only successful when there's consensus among the parties on the path forward. And so there will be groundwork would be necessary well in advance of a special session to get to that place. Otherwise, I think we'll be at a place like we were last year, was where there wasn't consensus. And there won't, addressing public safety is not something one can do kind of slapdash. It's something that you really need to work carefully on and thoughtfully on. And it took me and our committee, Courts, Corrections, and Justice, several months of really digging into the issue before we were ready with something that I think is a good bill. And to expect that for some of these other items that the governor's been talking about without that kind of considered, thoughtful, consensus approach will leave us yet again with a special session that will be, I think, frustrating for just about everyone involved.
Sure. And that really brings me to my next subject, which is, the session may be 60 days in the case of this year, but there is also the legislative interim. And I know you'll be probably pretty busy during that period. So tell me a little bit about what you have planned before the 2026 legislative session.
So to be, last year I was chair of Courts, Corrections, and Justice, and this year Senator Cervantes will be chair. So we have not developed our work plan yet, but I'm, certain that we will be looking at some of the items that people have been discussing. Juvenile crime and juvenile justice will undoubtedly be something we'll be looking at. And that will be, I know that people are very concerned about it, and rightfully so. And I imagine we will be hearing proposals from legislators on that particular topic. That is something the governor has talked about for the special session, and I imagine we'll be discussing it during the interim and hopefully come up with a consensus approach about how we should be addressing that. I personally have some interest going forward in terms of what we might want to be looking at. I'm very concerned about the use of AI. I don't know if you remember, Maggie, I had an artificial intelligence bill that was trying to get a regulatory framework about how AI is used in what we're calling consequential decisions. And consequential decisions are things like used to evaluate job applicants or evaluate people who may apply for a lease in a certain apartment complex, or for credit or for insurance and the like. And there is a movement across the country to try to get a handle on AI. AI is a wonderful tool in so many ways, but it has far-reaching implications in people's lives, and we need to understand those and have a better handle on how it can be used. There was a privacy bill filed in the House and in the Senate that addresses. I think we need to be looking at how our information is being used and put some guardrails on that as well. And so I'd like to be pursuing those initiatives again and trying to get a place where we can get some consensus on how we might move forward on those issues. So that's something I'm personally going to be working on, and I imagine these issues will be discussed during the interim session as well.
Definitely. It sounds like there's plenty more work to do. Well,
yeah, absolutely. And that's what the interim's for us to have good conversations about a lot of these topics.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Representative Chandler. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for inviting me on the program. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week.